Picture a grand seaside theatre, where the enigmatic magician Cornelius Vane vanishes in a locked cabinet before a gasping crowd. Was it a trick gone wrong, or something darker? Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster unravelling a web of secrets, jealousy, greed and betrayal. From the nervous assistant to the scheming rival, every suspect hides a motive. As clues emerge, chloroform, a bruised wrist, falsified books, Miss Marple weaves the threads to reveal a chilling plot. Will she find Cornelius before the curtain falls forever? Dive into The Vanished Magician, where nothing is as it seems. Chapter 1. The Curtain Rises. The Grand Pavilion Theatre in St. Mary's Cove stood like a faded jewel against the backdrop of the grey, restless sea. Its gilded arches and crimson curtains, though slightly worn, still carried an air of faded grandeur, whispering of evenings filled with laughter and gasps of wonder. On this particular autumn night, the theatre was alive with a hum of anticipation, its foyer crowded with eager townsfolk and curious visitors, their voices mingling with the clink of glasses and the rustle of programmes. The occasion was the much-anticipated performance of Cornelius Vane, a magician whose name had become synonymous with the impossible, his illusions drawing crowds from as far as London. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a velvet-upholstered chair near the centre of the auditorium, adjusted her shawl and surveyed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness. She had come to St. Mary's Cove at the insistence of her nephew, Raymond West, who believed a seaside holiday would do her good. "A bit of excitement, Aunt Jane," he had said, his eyes twinkling, "and a chance to see something extraordinary." Miss Marple, never one to refuse an outing, had agreed, though she suspected the true excitement lay not in the spectacle, but in the people who filled the theatre. Each, in her experience, a potential story of secrets and motives. Her seat, thoughtfully chosen by Raymond's friend, Mr. Percival, the theatre's owner, offered a clear view of both stage and audience. To her left, a young couple whispered excitedly, their programme already creased from eager handling. To her right, an elderly gentleman with a monocle polished it absent-mindedly, his attention fixed on the ornate chandelier overhead. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, deceptively mild behind her spectacles, moved from face to face, noting the flushed cheeks of anticipation, the occasional furtive glance, the subtle tensions that always seem to linger in a crowd. People, she thought, were never quite as they appeared, even in a place meant for illusion. The house lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the auditorium. A single spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the stage where a plume of crimson smoke swirled upward, accompanied by a low, resonant hum from the orchestra pit. From the smoke emerged Cornelius Vane, his tall, lean figure commanding attention. His silver cape caught the light, shimmering like liquid moonlight, and his dark eyes gleamed with a knowing intensity. The audience erupted in applause, and Miss Marple, clapping politely, noted the magician's practised ease, the way his movements were both deliberate and effortless, like a man who knew precisely how to hold a room in thrall. The performance unfolded with breathtaking precision. Cornelius made doves appear from empty scarves, turned water into flame, and plucked a child's lost ribbon from the air with a flourish that drew delighted gasps. Each trick was more daring than the last, building toward the grand finale. A vanishing act billed as the cabinet of eternity. Miss Marple, her hands resting lightly on her lap, watched not only the stage, but the reactions around her. A woman in a fur stole gripped her companion's arm. A man in a tweed suit leaned forward, his brow furrowed, as if trying to unravel the mechanics of the impossible. The cabinet itself was a marvel, an imposing structure of polished oak adorned with intricate brass fittings, its surface gleaming under the stage lights. Cornelius, with a theatrical bow, invited Lily Harper, his assistant, to demonstrate its solidity. Lily, a slender young woman with auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a sequined headpiece, tapped the cabinet's sides, her smile bright but her movements slightly hesitant. Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the faintest tremor in Lily's fingers as she stepped back, allowing Cornelius to enter the cabinet alone. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cornelius announced, his voice rich and resonant, "tonight I shall defy the laws of nature. Within this locked cabinet I will vanish, gone, as if I never existed." The audience leaned forward, breathless. Lily secured the cabinet's heavy lock, and a drum roll echoed through the theatre. A blinding flash of light erupted, followed by a gust of smoke. The cabinet door swung open, revealing nothing. The interior was empty, the magician gone. The crowd erupted in cheers, expecting the triumphant reappearance that always followed such tricks. But seconds passed, then a minute, and the stage remained silent. The curtains, meant to rise for a bow, stayed stubbornly closed. Whispers spread like wildfire through the audience. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her knitting bag untouched at her feet. Something was wrong. She had seen many performances in her time, village plays, church pageants, even the occasional London show. But this felt different. The air held not the thrill of illusion, but the sharp edge of reality. As the house lights rose, Mr. Percival appeared on stage, his round face flushed with unease. "Ladies and gentlemen, a slight delay," he said, his voice strained. "Please remain seated." But the crowd, sensing irregularity, began to murmur louder, some rising to peer toward the wings. Miss Marple, calm and unobtrusive, slipped her programme into her bag and rose, her small figure moving toward the aisle with surprising purpose. Raymond, catching her eye, followed, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Something's amiss, isn't it, Aunt Jane?" he whispered as they reached the foyer. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled faintly, though her expression remained grave. "I'm afraid so, dear," she said softly. "A vanishing act is all very well, but I suspect this one was not part of the script." Chapter 2. The Empty Stage, the Grand Pavilion Theatre. Moments after Cornelius Vane's inexplicable disappearance had transformed from a temple of enchantment to a hive of disquiet. The audience, no longer content to sit in their velvet seats, spilled into the aisles, their voices a rising tide of speculation and unease. Miss Jane Marple, standing in the foyer with her nephew Raymond, observed the chaos with her characteristic composure, her small gloved hands clasped lightly around her knitting bag. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, cigar smoke, and the faint tang of grease paint drifting from backstage. Raymond, his literary mind already spinning tales of intrigue, leaned close. "This isn't part of the act, is it, Aunt Jane?" he asked, his brow furrowed. Miss Marple's pale blue eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, met his. "I rather think not, dear," she replied, her voice soft but certain. "A magician may play with appearances, but this feels altogether too real." She glanced toward the heavy oak doors leading to the auditorium, where Mr. Percival, the theatre's owner, was attempting to quell the crowd's growing agitation with assurances that all would be explained. His forced smile and perspiring forehead suggested otherwise. Miss Marple, with Raymond trailing, made her way toward the side entrance to the stage, where Mr. Percival had promised her access. Her nephew's connection to the theatre owner had proven useful, for Mr. Percival, flustered but courteous, had invited her to observe the unfolding situation. "You've a knack for seeing things clearly, Miss Marple," he had said earlier that evening, unaware of the depth of her perceptiveness. Now, as she stepped through the narrow passage lined with ropes and pulleys, she entered a world of shadows and secrets, where the illusion of the stage gave way to the reality of human nature. Backstage was a maelstrom of activity. Stagehands darted about, their boots thudding on the worn wooden floor, while props, a gilded mirror, a velvet-draped table, a cage of doves, stood abandoned in the dim light of a single overhead bulb. Miss Marple's eyes, accustomed to the subtle cues of village life, took in every detail. The scuff marks on the floor, the faint smell of sawdust, the nervous glances exchanged among the crew. At the centre of the chaos stood Lily Harper, Cornelius's assistant, her sequined costume catching the light as she wrung her hands. Her auburn hair, now slightly askew, framed a face pale with shock. Nearby, George Baxter, the theatre's manager, barked orders with a voice that trembled despite its volume. His portly frame, clad in a too-tight suit, glistened with sweat, and his cigar, forgotten in his hand, sent curls of smoke upward. Miss Marple paused near a stack of crates, her small figure unobtrusive yet perfectly positioned to observe. Raymond, hovering at her side, whispered, "It's like a scene from one of my novels, only less predictable." She gave him a faint smile, her mind already sifting through the tableau before her. Lily's distress seemed genuine, but Miss Marple noted the way her eyes flickered toward the wings, as if expecting someone or something to emerge. Baxter's bluster, meanwhile, had the air of a man trying to assert control over a situation slipping from his grasp. A young stagehand, lanky and pale, caught her attention as he lingered near the locked cabinet that had been the centerpiece of Cornelius's final trick. His name, she learned later, was Tom Weaver, and his restless movements suggested more than mere concern. His hands, calloused from handling ropes and props, fiddled with a coil of wire, and his eyes darted toward the cabinet, then away, as if it held some secret he dared not approach. Miss Marple made a mental note of his unease, her thoughts drifting to the countless young men she had known in St. Mary Mead, boys who fidgeted when they had something to hide, whether a pilfered apple or a deeper transgression. Then there was Victor Slade, the rival magician, who stood apart from the chaos, his lean frame silhouetted against the backdrop of a painted starry sky. His black suit was impeccably tailored, his thin lips curved in a smile that seemed more amused than alarmed. Miss Marple had noticed him earlier in the audience, or so he claimed, watching Cornelius's performance with a keenness that bordered on predatory. Now backstage, he seemed almost too at ease, his hands in his pockets, his eyes scanning the scene with a detached curiosity. She wondered what brought him here, so close to the heart of his rival's domain. The arrival of Inspector Craddock, a familiar face from Scotland Yard, brought a semblance of order. His broad shoulders and steady gaze commanded attention, though Miss Marple noted the faint crease of frustration on his forehead. He had worked with her before, in cases that seemed simple but unravelled into complexity, and he greeted her now with a nod of respect. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice low, "I didn't expect to see you here, but I'm glad of it. This is a queer business." "Indeed it is, Inspector," she replied, her tone mild. "A man does not vanish into thin air without reason or assistance." She glanced toward the cabinet, its polished oak surface gleaming under the stage lights. "Have you examined it yet?" "Not thoroughly," Craddock admitted. "The crew insists it's part of the act, but I'm not convinced. No sign of Mr. Vane, and the theatre's been searched top to bottom." He gestured toward Lily, who stood nearby, her arms crossed tightly. "Miss Harper says the trick was rehearsed exactly as planned. Vane entered the cabinet, she locked it, and then nothing." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the details. "And yet," she said softly, "something went wrong, or perhaps for someone it went precisely right." Craddock raised an eyebrow, accustomed to her cryptic insights, and moved to question Lily further. Lily Harper, when approached, seemed on the verge of tears. "I don't understand," she said, her voice trembling. "Cornelius was in the cabinet. I locked it myself, just as we practiced. He was supposed to reappear in the wings, but—" Her words trailed off, and she pressed a hand to her mouth. Miss Marple, standing quietly nearby, noted the girl's genuine distress, but also the way her eyes avoided the cabinet, as if it held some unspoken dread. "Miss Harper," Miss Marple said gently, stepping forward, "you must have worked closely with Mr. Vane. Did he seem himself this evening? No worries or distractions?" Her tone was that of a kindly aunt, but her eyes were sharp, missing nothing. Lily hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her costume. "He was quiet," she admitted, "more than usual. He didn't talk much before the show, but that's not so strange. He always focused before a performance." She paused, then added, "He did mention something about wanting to change things. New tricks, maybe a new start. I thought he was just tired." Miss Marple nodded, her knitting needles clicking softly in her bag, though she had not yet reached for them. "And did anyone else have access to the cabinet? It seems a complex piece of machinery." "Only Cornelius knew how it worked," Lily said quickly. "He was particular about that. Even I didn't know the full mechanism, just my part in locking it." Her voice wavered, and Miss Marple sensed a thread of truth, but also a gap, a hesitation that suggested more lay beneath the surface. As Craddock moved to inspect the cabinet, Miss Marple turned her attention to George Baxter, who was now pacing near a rack of costumes, his cigar reduced to a stub. His face, red and glistening, betrayed a man under pressure. "Mr. Baxter," she said, approaching with her usual unobtrusive charm, "this must be terribly upsetting for you. As manager, you must know Mr. Vane's habits well." Baxter stopped, eyeing her warily. "Upsetting? It's a disaster," he snapped, then softened, perhaps recalling her connection to Mr. Percival. "Cornelius is the heart of this theatre. Without him, we're sunk, but he'll turn up, probably off planning some grand stunt." His laugh was forced, and Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted toward the exit, as if he longed to flee. "Did Mr. Vane ever speak of leaving the theatre?" she asked, her voice mild as ever. "A man of his talent must have many opportunities." Baxter's expression tightened. "Leave? Nonsense! He's under contract. This is his stage, his audience." He puffed out his chest, but the gesture seemed hollow. Miss Marple's mind, honed by years of observing human nature, caught the flicker of unease in his demeanour. A manager's loyalty, she knew, could be as much about self-interest as devotion. Her attention shifted to Tom Weaver, who had moved to the edge of the stage, his lanky frame half hidden behind a curtain. He was watching Lily, his expression unreadable, but Miss Marple noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers gripped the curtain's edge. She made a mental note to speak with him later, for young men, in her experience, often revealed more than they intended when questioned gently. Victor Slade, meanwhile, had drifted closer to the cabinet, his hands still in his pockets, his smile unchanged. Miss Marple approached him, her steps slow and deliberate. "Mr. Slade," she said, her tone pleasant, "you must find this all quite extraordinary as a fellow magician. Do such vanishings often go awry?" Slade's smile widened, though it did not reach his eyes. "Rarely, Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "Cornelius is a master. If he's gone, it's because he meant to, or someone meant him to." The last words carried a faint edge, and Miss Marple's heart quickened. A challenge, perhaps, or a taunt. "You were in the audience, I believe?" she asked, her eyes meeting his. "Front row," he said without hesitation. "Best seat to study a rival's craft." But his confidence, she thought, was too polished, too rehearsed. She filed the detail away like a stitch in a pattern to be examined later. Inspector Craddock, having completed his initial inspection of the cabinet, returned with a frown. "No hidden compartments, no trapdoors we can find," he said, his voice low. "The lock's intact, and the key was with Miss Harper. If Vane's not here, he's left the theatre, or someone took him." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning over the possibilities. A locked cabinet, a missing magician, and a cast of characters each with their own secrets. She thought of Saint, Mary Mead, where a lost brooch or a whispered rumour could unravel a web of deceit. Here, in the glittering world of the theatre, the stakes were higher, but the principles were the same. People, she knew, were rarely what they seemed, and motives like threads could be traced to their source. As the police began their search of the theatre, checking dressing rooms, the basement, even the roof, Miss Marple remained backstage, her presence barely noticed amid the flurry. She watched Lily retreat to a corner, her shoulders shaking. Baxter light another cigar, his hands unsteady. Tom Weaver slipped toward the prop room, his steps quick and furtive. And Slade, ever the observer, lingered near the wings, his eyes never leaving the cabinet. Raymond, sensing her absorption, leaned close. "You're already solving it, aren't you, Aunt Jane?" he said, half teasing. "Not solving, dear," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "Merely observing. The stage is empty, but the play, I think, has only just begun." Chapter 3. The Assistant's Tale. The morning after Cornelius Vane's disappearance, the Grand Pavilion Theatre lay quiet, its grandeur muted by the grey light filtering through the high windows of the manager's office. The air carried a faint mustiness, mingling with the scent of old wood and the lingering trace of last night's grease paint. Miss Jane Marple sat in a worn leather chair, her knitting bag at her feet, a cup of tea steaming gently on the desk before her. The office, cluttered with playbills, ledgers, and a half-empty bottle of brandy, was a stark contrast to the polished spectacle of the stage. Yet it was here, in this unassuming room, that Miss Marple began to unravel the threads of the mystery. Mr. Percival, the theatre's owner, had insisted she take tea with him. His gratitude for her presence tinged with a nervous hope that her quiet wisdom might shed light on the chaos. "You've a way of seeing things, Miss Marple," he said, his round face creased with worry. "I don't know what's happened to Cornelius, but if anyone can make sense of it, it's you." Miss Marple smiled modestly, her pale blue eyes flicking to the door as Lily Harper entered, summoned at her request. Lily, no longer in her sequined costume but dressed in a simple grey frock, looked smaller, more fragile, her auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands, clasped tightly before her, betrayed a nervous energy, and her eyes, red-rimmed from lack of sleep, darted to the window before settling on Miss Marple. "You wanted to see me?" she asked, her voice soft but edged with apprehension. "Yes, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone as gentle as a village vicar's wife offering comfort. "I thought we might have a little chat. It must be terribly upsetting, all this uncertainty about Mr. Vane." She gestured to a chair and Lily sat, her posture rigid. "It's awful," Lily said, her voice catching. "I keep thinking he'll walk through the door, laughing, saying it was all part of the show. But he hasn't." She twisted a handkerchief, its edges frayed from her anxious fingers. Miss Marple noted the gesture, so like the young women of St. Mary Mead when faced with a troubling secret. A lost love, a family quarrel, or something deeper. "You worked closely with Mr. Vane," Miss Marple began, her knitting needles clicking softly as she drew them from her bag. The rhythmic sound seemed to ease the tension in the room, and Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly. "You must know him better than most. Was he quite himself in the days leading up to the performance?" Lily hesitated, her eyes flickering to the desk, where a photograph of Cornelius in his silver cape stood propped against a stack of papers. "He was preoccupied," she said at last. "Cornelius was always intense before a show, but this time he seemed distant. He'd stay late, working on new tricks, muttering about needing something fresh. I thought it was just the pressure of the season." Miss Marple nodded, her needles moving steadily. "And did he speak of anyone troubling him? A disagreement, perhaps, or someone who wished him ill?" Her question was gentle, but her eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, watched Lily closely. Lily's fingers tightened on the handkerchief. "He didn't say anything outright," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "But he and Mr. Baxter had words a few times, about money, I think. Cornelius was frustrated, said the theatre wasn't what it used to be. And," she paused, her cheeks flushing faintly, "there was Victor Slade. Cornelius didn't trust him. He said Slade was always sniffing around, trying to steal his ideas." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, a subtle sign of her interest. "Mr. Slade," she murmured, "a rival, I understand. Did Mr. Vane believe he posed a real threat?" Lily nodded, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's for the first time. "Cornelius was sure Slade wanted his act, the whole thing, not just one trick. He caught him once, a few months ago, sketching the cabinet in the prop room. Cornelius was furious, sent him packing. But Slade just laughed, said he'd figure it out eventually." Her voice trembled, and Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her expression one of quiet sympathy. "How distressing for Mr. Vane," she said, "and for you, my dear, being so loyal to him." The word loyal hung in the air, and Lily's blush deepened. Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human nature, saw the telltale signs of affection. The way Lily's voice softened when she spoke of Cornelius, the protective instinct in her words. It reminded her of a young housemaid in St. Mary Mead, who had once hidden a letter from a suitor, her loyalty masking a deeper devotion. "Did you ever see Mr. Slade near the cabinet again?" Miss Marple asked, her tone unchanged but her question precise. Lily shook her head quickly. "No, not after that. Cornelius made sure the cabinet was locked when we weren't rehearsing. He was so particular about it." She hesitated, then added, "But I did see Slade in the theatre a few days ago, talking to Tom Weaver." They stopped when they saw me, but it looked secretive. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her mind filing away this new detail. Tom Weaver, the stagehand, with his nervous glances and furtive movements. And Victor Slade, whose polished charm seemed to cloak something sharper. "Thank you, my dear," she said, her voice warm. "You've been most helpful. It's often the small things, you know, that make all the difference." Rose, her expression a mix of relief and lingering worry. "Do you think Cornelius is all right?" she asked, her voice small. Miss Marple smiled, her eyes kind but guarded. "I hope so, my dear. We shall do our best to find him." As Lily left, Miss Marple sat back, her thoughts turning over the conversation. Lily's loyalty was clear, but her hesitation, her quick glances, suggested she knew more than she had said, perhaps not consciously, but tucked away like a forgotten stitch in a pattern. The door opened again, and Raymond entered, his face alight with curiosity. "Well, Aunt Jane, have you cracked the case yet?" he teased, settling into a chair with the air of a man expecting a story. "Not quite, dear," Miss Marple replied, her needles clicking steadily. "But Miss Harper has given me a few threads to follow. People, you see, are like knitting. One loose thread can unravel the whole design, if you know where to pull." She paused, her eyes distant, "and I suspect there are several loose threads in this theatre." Raymond leaned forward, his literary instincts piqued. "Such as?" Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Oh, a rivalry here, a disagreement there, and perhaps a young woman's heart, which can complicate matters dreadfully." She said no more, but her mind was already weaving the threads together, each detail a step closer to the truth behind Cornelius Vane's vanishing act. Chapter 4. The Manager's Motives. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the foyer of the Grand Pavilion Theatre, its marble tiles dulled by years of footfalls and neglect. Miss Jane Marple stood near the ticket booth, her small figure wrapped in a tweed coat, her knitting bag slung over one arm. The theatre, so alive with glamour the previous night, now seemed a hollow shell, its silence broken only by the distant clatter of a cleaning crew and the occasional creak of the building settling. She had arranged to meet George Baxter, the theatre's manager, here in the foyer, where the open space and daylight might reveal more than the dim confines of his office. Miss Marple knew that people, when caught off guard, often let slip truths they meant to conceal, much like the villagers of St. Mary Mead, who betrayed their secrets in the bustle of the post office. Baxter arrived promptly, his heavy footsteps echoing as he emerged from a side door. His portly frame strained against a pinstriped suit, and the scent of cigar smoke clung to him like a second skin. His face, flushed and lined, bore the marks of a sleepless night, and his small, darting eyes met Miss Marple's with a mix of irritation and forced courtesy. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but tempered by the knowledge of her connection to Mr. Percival, "I hope this won't take long. I've a theatre to run, even with Cornelius gone missing." "Of course, Mr. Baxter," Miss Marple replied, her tone as mild as a summer breeze. I shan't keep you. It's only that I thought you might shed some light on Mr. Vane's state of mind. As his manager, you must have known him well." She smiled, her pale blue eyes gentle but unwavering, and gestured toward a bench near the foyer's grand staircase. Baxter hesitated, then sat, his bulk causing the bench to creak. He lit a fresh cigar, puffing out a cloud of smoke that curled toward the chandelier above. "Cornelius was a genius," he said, his tone carrying a practiced admiration. "A bit temperamental, mind you, but that's artist for you. Always chasing the next big trick. This vanishing act, though, pure publicity stunt, mark my words. He's probably holed up somewhere, laughing at us all." Miss Marple's needles, drawn from her bag, began their familiar rhythm, the soft click providing a counterpoint to Baxter's bluster. "A stunt, you say?" she mused, her voice thoughtful. "It would be a bold one, to leave an audience waiting and a theatre in disarray. Did Mr. Vane often plan such dramatic gestures?" Baxter shifted, his cigar pausing mid-air. "Not often," he admitted, his eyes narrowing. "But he was always full of surprises. Kept his cards close, even with me. Said it was part of the magic," he laughed. A short barking sound that lacked conviction. Miss Marple noted the way his free hand tugged at his collar, a gesture she had seen in St. Mary Mead when the butcher's boy was questioned about missing coins. "You managed his finances, I understand," she said, her tone unchanged. "That must be a great responsibility, with such a celebrated performer." Her eyes flicked to Baxter's wrist, where a gold watch gleamed, its intricate design at odds with the theatre's peeling paint and frayed carpets. Baxter's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I handle the books. Ticket sales, contracts, all that. Cornelius drew the crowds, but I kept the wheels turning." He leaned back, puffing his cigar with renewed vigor, as if to assert his importance. "Not an easy job, mind. Expenses pile up. Props, costumes, that blasted cabinet of his. Cost a fortune to build." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her needles never faltering. "It must be challenging, balancing such costs with the theatre's needs. I noticed the foyer could use a touch of care. Yet your watch, Mr. Baxter, is quite splendid. A gift, perhaps?" The question, delivered with her usual gentle curiosity, caught Baxter off guard. His hand froze, the cigar's ash dropping onto his trouser leg. He brushed it off hastily, his face reddening further. "A gift, yes," he said quickly. "From an old friend, nothing to do with the theatre." His eyes darted to the side, avoiding hers, and Miss Marple's mind registered the lie, as clear as a dropped stitch in a perfect row. "I see," she said, her voice as soft as ever. "And did Mr. Vane ever express concerns about the theatre's finances? A man of his ambition must have had plans, perhaps for new ventures." She leaned forward slightly, her expression one of innocent interest, but her eyes were sharp, watching for the smallest tell. Baxter's fingers tightened around his cigar, and he exhaled a plume of smoke that seemed to shield him from her gaze. "Cornelius was always dreaming up new shows," he said, his tone dismissive. "Talked about touring abroad, maybe America. But he was under contract here. No reason to leave." His words were firm, but Miss Marple caught the faint tremor in his voice, the way his eyes flicked toward the staircase, as if longing for escape. She thought of the ledgers she had glimpsed in Mr. Percival's office, their pages filled with neat columns that might hide discrepancies. In St. Mary Mead, she had once helped unravel a case of missing church funds, the culprit betrayed by a new bicycle. He could not explain. Baxter's watch, his tailored suit, his uneasy manner, all suggested a man living beyond the means of a theatre manager's salary. But was it greed, she wondered, or something more sinister that connected him to Cornelius's disappearance? "Mr. Vane trusted you, I'm sure," she said, her needles clicking steadily. "But artists can be particular. Did he ever question your management, perhaps about funds or bookings?" Baxter's face darkened, and for a moment she thought he might snap. But he forced a smile. His teeth yellowed from years of cigars. Question me. He had no head for numbers. Left it all to me, and I did right by him. If he's gone, it's his own doing, not mine. He stood abruptly, brushing imaginary lint from his jacket. "I've got work to do, Miss Marple, if you'll excuse me." "Of course," she said, her smile unwavering. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Baxter. It's so helpful to understand the workings of the theatre." She watched him stride away, his heavy steps echoing in the empty foyer, and her mind turned over the conversation. Baxter's defensiveness, his lavish accessories, his quick dismissal of Cornelius's plans, they painted a picture of a man with something to hide, though whether it was theft or something darker remained unclear. As she tucked her knitting back into her bag, Raymond appeared, his eyes bright with curiosity. "Well, Aunt Jane, what did you make of our Mr. Baxter?" he asked, leaning against the ticket booth with a grin. "He's a bit of a blusterer, isn't he?" "Indeed, dear," Miss Marple replied, her voice soft but thoughtful. "But bluster often hides unease, and unease often hides guilt. Not necessarily of a crime, mind you, but of something. Mr. Baxter is a man under pressure, and I suspect his troubles go beyond a missing magician." She glanced toward the auditorium, where the stage lay silent, its secrets locked within the oak cabinet. Raymond chuckled. "You're already building a case, aren't you? I can see it in your eyes." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Not a case, dear, merely a pattern. Like knitting, it's all about seeing where the threads lead. And Mr. Baxter, I think, is a thread worth following." She adjusted her shawl and moved toward the exit, her mind already turning to the next piece of the puzzle, her steps as steady and purposeful as ever. Chapter 5. The rival's shadow, the salty breeze of St. Mary's Cove, drifted through the open window of the seaside cafe, a quaint establishment nestled between the promenade and the town's cobbled streets. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, her knitting bag resting beside a pot of Earl Grey and a plate of scones. The cafe, with its checkered tablecloths and chipped porcelain, offered a stark contrast to the grandeur of the Grand Pavilion Theatre. But it was precisely this ordinariness that Miss Marple preferred for her next conversation. People, she had found, revealed more in the everyday than in the spotlight, much like the villagers of St. Mary Mead, who let slip their secrets over tea at the local shop. Victor Slade, the rival magician, had agreed to meet her here, his acceptance delivered with a polished charm that bordered on condescension. He arrived precisely on time, his lean frame cutting a sharp silhouette against the cafe's sunlit doorway. His black suit, immaculate as ever, seemed out of place among the fishermen and holiday-makers who filled the room, their laughter and chatter a lively backdrop. Slade's thin lips curved into a smile as he approached, his dark eyes assessing Miss Marple with a mix of amusement and curiosity. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice smooth as polished glass, "I confess I'm intrigued. What brings an amateur sleuth to question a humble magician?" Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. her smile as gentle as a summer breeze. "Oh, I'm no sleuth, Mr. Slade," she said, pouring him a cup of tea with a steady hand. "Merely an old lady with a fondness for puzzles. And Mr. Vane's disappearance is quite a puzzle, don't you think?" She gestured to the chair opposite, and Slade sat, his movements graceful but calculated, like a performer gauging his audience. "Quite a puzzle indeed," Slade agreed, stirring his tea with a slow, deliberate motion. "Cornelius has a flair for the dramatic. Vanishing in front of a full house? It's the sort of stunt I'd applaud, if it weren't so disruptive." His smile widened, but Miss Marple noted the faint edge in his tone, a sharpness that belied his casual demeanour. She reached for her knitting, the needles clicking softly as she began a new row. The rhythmic sound seemed to fill the silence, disarming in its familiarity. "You knew Mr. Vane well, I take it?" she asked, her voice mild. "As a fellow magician, you must appreciate his craft." Slade's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile held. "Know him? Well enough, I suppose. We crossed paths at festivals, the occasional London club. Cornelius was unique. His tricks had a certain elegance, a precision I envied." He leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. "I'd have killed to know his secrets, but that's just professional curiosity. Every magician wants to crack the other's code." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her mind catching on his choice of words. Kill was a strong term, even in jest, and she filed it away, like a misaligned stitch to be examined later. "How fascinating," she said, her tone unchanged. "And were you studying his code, as it were, during last night's performance?" "You were in the audience, I believe." "Front row," Slade said promptly, his eyes meeting hers with a confidence that felt rehearsed. "Best place to watch a master at work. I wanted to see how he pulled off that cabinet trick. It's a beauty, simple yet baffling. But then, you saw it yourself. Poof, and he's gone." He spread his hands, mimicking a magician's flourish, but Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the faintest tightening of his jaw, as if the gesture masked unease. She nodded, her needles resuming their rhythm. "It was a remarkable trick," she agreed, "though I confess I'm more curious about the man behind it." "Did Mr. Vane ever speak of his plans? New shows, perhaps, or changes in his career?" Slade's smile flickered, and he sipped his tea, buying a moment. "Cornelius was always dreaming big," he said at last. "Talked about taking his act to Paris, maybe New York. He had ideas for tricks no one's seen before, but he was cagey. Never shared the details, not even with his assistants, from what I hear." He leaned forward, his voice lowering. "If you ask me, he was running from something. A man doesn't vanish like that unless he's got a reason." Miss Marple's eyes met his, her expression one of polite interest. "Running, you say? That's a curious thought. From what, do you suppose? Debts, perhaps? Or a rival's envy?" Her question was soft, but its precision was like a needle slipping through fabric, probing for a hidden seam. Slade laughed, a low, controlled sound. "Debts? Maybe. Cornelius lived large. Fancy dinners, custom props. As for rivals," he shrugged, his eyes glinting. "I won't deny I wanted his secrets, but steal them. That's not my style. I'd rather outdo him on stage." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple sensed a current beneath them, a hint of resentment that reminded her of a St. Mary Mead gardener who once sabotaged a rival's roses out of spite. She set her knitting aside, folding her hands in her lap. "You must have a keen eye, Mr. Slade, to notice so much from the front row." Did anything strike you as unusual last night? Before the cabinet trick, perhaps?" Slade's fingers stilled on his teacup, and for a moment his composure wavered. Unusual? Not really. The show was flawless, as always. Lily did her part, locking the cabinet. The crew was in place. Just another night at the pavilion, until it wasn't. He leaned back, his smile returning. "If you're looking for clues, Miss Marple, you'd do better to ask that stagehand, Tom Weaver. Skittish lad, always lurking about. I saw him near the props before the show, looking like he'd swallowed a secret." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the deflection. Slade's quickness to point elsewhere was telling, much like the village postmistress who shifted blame when caught gossiping. "Thank you, Mr. Slade," she said, her voice warm. "You've been most helpful. It's the small details, you know, that often unravel a mystery." As Slade rose to leave, his coat brushed against the table, and a small object fell to the floor, a ticket stub, its edges worn. Miss Marple, with her sharp eyes, glimpsed the seat number. Balcony, row C, not the front row, as he had claimed. She said nothing, merely smiling as he retrieved it with a quick, almost imperceptible flush. "Good day, Miss Marple," he said, his charm intact but strained. "I hope you find your answers." "Good day, Mr. Slade," she replied, her needles clicking once more as he departed. She sat for a moment, sipping her tea, her mind turning over the conversation. Slade's lie about his seat was a small thing, but small things, she knew, could unravel great deceptions. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead seamstress, who once lied about a torn dress, only to reveal a theft when pressed. Slade's confidence, his quick deflection to Tom Weaver, and now this discrepancy. They were threads in a pattern, and Miss Marple was beginning to see its shape. Raymond, who had been lingering near the cafe's counter, joined her, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Well, Aunt Jane, what's the verdict on our slippery magician?" he asked, helping himself to a scone. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "Mr. Slade is a man who knows how to perform, dear," she said, her voice soft but thoughtful. "But even the best performers can miss a step. He's given me something to ponder, and I suspect there's more to his story than he'd like us to know." She tucked her knitting into her bag, her mind already tracing the next thread in the mystery of Cornelius Vane's disappearance. Chapter 6. The Stagehand's Secret. The basement of the Grand Pavilion Theatre was a labyrinth of shadows, its air heavy with the scent of dust, old paint, and the faint metallic tang of machinery. Narrow corridors wound past stacks of crates, discarded props and coils of rope, the detritus of countless performances. Miss Jane Marple descended the creaking wooden stairs with care, her small figure wrapped in a shawl, her knitting bag slung over one arm. The dim glow of a single bulb cast flickering patterns on the walls, and the distant hum of the sea beyond St. Mary's Cove seemed to seep through the stone. She had come to find Tom Weaver, the stagehand whose nervous demeanour had caught her attention the night of Cornelius Vane's disappearance. In her experience, those who lingered on the edges of a scene often held pieces of the puzzle, much like the quiet lads in St. Mary Mead, who knew more of village scandals than they let on. Tom was exactly where she expected to find him, hunched over a workbench in a cluttered corner, polishing a brass lamp that had once adorned a long-forgotten production. His lanky frame was tense, his movements jerky, as if he sensed her approach before she spoke. "Mr. Weaver," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but clear, carrying the warmth of a kindly aunt. "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I thought we might have a little chat." Tom started, nearly dropping the lamp, and turned to face her. His pale face, dusted with freckles, was drawn, and his grey eyes darted toward the stairs before settling on her. "Miss Marple," he mumbled, wiping his hands on a rag. "Didn't expect you down here. It's a mess, this place." His voice was low, with a faint tremor that reminded her of a saint. "Mary Mead boy caught pilfering apples from an orchard." "Oh, I don't mind a bit of clutter," she said, smiling as she settled onto a nearby stool, her knitting bag resting on her lap. "It's rather like my garden shed at home, full of odds and ends, but each with a story." She drew out her needles, the soft click filling the silence as she began a new row. The sound, familiar and unthreatening, seemed to ease Tom's tension, though his fingers still fidgeted with the rag. "I wanted to talk about Mr. Vane," she continued, her tone conversational. "You must see a great deal, working backstage. All the comings and goings, the little details that others miss." Her pale blue eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, watched him closely, noting the way his shoulders hunched, as if bracing for a blow. Tom shrugged, his gaze fixed on the lamp. "I just move props, set the stage," he said. "Don't pay much mind to what's going on. Cornelius, Mr. Vane, he was always busy, planning his tricks. Didn't talk to me much." His words were clipped, but Miss Marple caught the slight hesitation, the way his eyes flicked to the side, avoiding hers. She nodded, her needles moving steadily. "Of course, you're kept busy. But young men like you often notice things, even if they don't mean to. Did Mr. Vane seem worried, perhaps, in the days before his performance? Or did you overhear anything unusual?" Her question was gentle, but precise, like a needle threading through fabric. Tom's hands stilled, and for a moment he seemed to wrestle with himself. "Heard him arguing with Mr. Baxter once or twice," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "In the office, after rehearsals. Something about money, Cornelius saying he wasn't seeing enough of it. Said he wanted to leave, start fresh somewhere else." He paused, then added, "Baxter got loud, told him he couldn't just walk away." Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind filing away the detail. An argument about money, a desire to leave. It fit with the picture she was forming of Cornelius Vane, a man chafing under unseen constraints. "How interesting," she said, her tone unchanged. "And was Mr. Baxter the only one Mr. Vane quarrelled with?" Tom's eyes darted to the stairs again, and he shifted his weight, the rag twisting in his hands. I don't know," he said too quickly. "I keep to myself mostly. Don't like getting mixed up in things." But Miss Marple, with her years of observing human nature, saw the telltale signs of evasion. The flushed cheeks, the restless hands, so like a St. Mary Mead lad who once hid a stolen watch under his mattress. She leaned forward slightly, her expression one of kindly concern. "You were near the cabinet that night, weren't you, Mr. Weaver? Before the final trick. It must be a fascinating piece, that cabinet. Did you ever see how it worked?" Her question was innocent, but her eyes were sharp, watching for the smallest reaction. Tom's face paled, and his fingers tightened on the rag, the knuckles whitening. "I was moving scenery," he said, his voice strained. "Had to shift some flats for the next act. I wasn't near the cabinet, not really." He swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing, and Miss Marple noted the faint bruise on his wrist, half hidden by his sleeve. It was fresh, the edges purple, as if from a struggle or a tight grip. "Oh, I'm sure you were busy," she said, her voice soothing. "But you must see so much, working in the wings. Did anyone else linger near the cabinet that night? Mr. Slade, perhaps? Or someone unexpected?" She kept her tone light, but the mention of Slade made Tom flinch, a reaction so subtle it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. "Slade?" Tom's voice cracked, and he cleared his throat. I didn't see him. He was in the audience, wasn't he?" But his eyes betrayed him, flickering with something akin to fear, and Miss Marple's mind seized on the discrepancy. Victor Slade had claimed to be in the front row, yet the ticket stub she had glimpsed suggested otherwise, and now Tom's reaction hinted at a connection she had yet to unravel. She smiled, her needles clicking once more. "Of course, my dear," she said. "I only ask because you young men are so observant. In my village there was a lad much like you, always in the background, but he saw everything, helped us find a missing brooch once, simply by noticing where others didn't look." Her story, half true, was meant to disarm, and Tom's shoulders relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained wary. "I didn't see anything," he said, his voice firmer now, as if he had settled on a story. "I was just doing my job. Cornelius went into the cabinet, Lily locked it, and that's all I know." He turned back to the lamp, polishing it with unnecessary vigour, signalling the conversation's end. Miss Marple rose, tucking her knitting into her bag. "Thank you, Mr. Weaver," she said, her voice warm. "You've been most kind to humour an old lady's questions. If you think of anything else, do let me know. It's often the smallest things that matter most." She paused at the foot of the stairs, glancing back at him. "That bruise on your wrist. Do take care, my dear. It looks painful." Tom's hand jerked to his sleeve, covering the mark, and his eyes widened, but he said nothing. Miss Marple climbed the stairs, her steps slow but purposeful, her mind turning over the encounter. Tom's evasiveness, his fear at the mention of Slade and the bruise, they were threads in the pattern, each pointing to a hidden truth. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead Gardner, who once bore a similar mark, the result of a scuffle over a debt, and wondered what pressures might weigh on a young man like Tom Weaver. As she emerged into the theatre's foyer, Raymond was waiting, his face alight with curiosity. "Well, Aunt Jane, did the stagehand spill any secrets?" he asked, falling into step beside her. "Not in so many words, dear," she replied, her voice soft but thoughtful. "But young men like Tom are often caught in someone else's game. He's afraid, I think, and fear makes people hide things. We shall have to watch him closely, and Mr. Slade as well. The threads are there, Raymond, and they're beginning to form a pattern." She adjusted her shawl, her eyes distant, already tracing the next step in the mystery of Cornelius Vane's vanishing act. Chapter 7. A Clue in the Cabinet. The Grand Pavilion Theatre, bathed in the pale light of an overcast afternoon, stood like a silent sentinel over St. Mary's Cove. Its ornate facade, weathered by sea air, seemed to guard its secrets as stubbornly as the locked cabinet at the heart of Cornelius Vane's disappearance. Miss Jane Marple, escorted by Inspector Craddock, made her way through the auditorium, her small figure moving with quiet determination. The theatre was empty now, save for a few stagehands sweeping the aisles, their brooms whispering against the worn carpet. The stage, stripped of its props, felt vast and hollow. The oak cabinet standing alone at its centre. An enigmatic relic of the night's mystery. Inspector Craddock, his broad frame slightly stooped from a sleepless night, led the way to the stage. "I don't know what you'll find, Miss Marple," he said, his voice a mix of scepticism and respect. "We've gone over this thing twice already, top to bottom, inside and out. No trapdoors, no hidden panels, nothing to suggest how Vane got out, or if he did." He rubbed his jaw, his eyes fixed on the cabinet. "But you've a way of seeing what we miss." Miss Marple's pale blue eyes twinkled faintly behind her spectacles. "You're very kind, Inspector," she said, her tone as gentle as ever. "But it's often the simplest things that escape notice, like a dropped stitch in a shawl. Shall we take a closer look?" She adjusted her shawl, her knitting bag slung over her arm, and approached the cabinet with the careful curiosity of one accustomed to unravelling village intrigues. The cabinet was an imposing structure, its polished oak surface gleaming under the stage lights. Brass fittings, intricately engraved, adorned its edges, and a heavy lock secured the door, its key now in Craddock's possession. Miss Marple circled it slowly, her steps deliberate, her eyes scanning every inch. She noted the faint grain of the wood, the precise craftsmanship, and the way the light caught on a series of fresh scratches near the lock. Small, irregular marks that seemed out of place on such a pristine surface. She leaned closer, her gloved fingers hovering just above the scratches, careful not to touch. "These marks," she murmured almost to herself. "They're recent, aren't they? Not the kind of wear you'd expect from regular use." Craddock joined her, squinting at the scratches, his brow furrowing. "Could be from the key," he suggested, producing the heavy brass key Lily Harper had used during the performance. "Lock's a bit stiff. Maybe she fumbled it." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. "But these are deeper, more deliberate, as if someone pried at it, or forced something into the lock." She straightened, her mind turning over the possibility. In St. Mary Mead, she had once noticed similar scratches on a locked jewellery box, the work of a desperate thief. Here, the marks suggested intent, perhaps haste, but not the practised hand of a magician like Cornelius. Craddock opened the cabinet door, revealing a narrow interior lined with black velvet. The space was barely large enough for a man of Cornelius's stature, with no visible seams or panels to suggest a hidden exit. Miss Marple stepped inside, her small frame dwarfed by the cabinet's dimensions. She ran her fingers lightly along the walls, feeling for irregularities, her senses attuned to the subtlest clues. As she did, a faint acrid scent reached her, a chemical tang, sharp and unmistakable, that lingered in the confined space. "Inspector," she said, her voice low but urgent, "do you smell that?" "It's not grease paint or wood polish. It's something else." She inhaled again, her mind sifting through memories. Chloroform, she thought, recalling a long-ago incident in St. Mary Mead when a local doctor's bag was pilfered, its contents including a small vial of the stuff. The scent was distinctive, and here, in the cabinet, it was unmistakable. Craddock leaned in, his nose wrinkling. "Can't say I notice much," he admitted, "but my nose isn't what it used to be. What do you think it is?" Miss Marple hesitated, her expression one of quiet certainty. "Chloroform, I believe," she said. "A small amount, perhaps, but enough to linger. It's not something you'd expect in a magician's cabinet unless—" She trailed off, her eyes distant, piecing together the implications. Chloroform suggested not a trick, but a crime, a deliberate act to subdue or conceal. She thought of Cornelius, his proud demeanour, his insistence on secrecy. Had someone used the cabinet not to make him vanish, but to take him? Craddock's face hardened. If you're right, Miss Marple, this changes things. Chloroform means someone meant Vane harm, or at least wanted him out of the way. He turned to a constable nearby, issuing orders to have the cabinet dusted for fingerprints and tested for chemical traces. Though I doubt we'll find much, he added, his voice grim. Whoever did this was careful. Miss Marple nodded, stepping out of the cabinet and turning her attention to the stage floor. She noticed a faint scuff mark near the cabinet's base, a smudge of dirt that seemed out of place amid the polished wood. Kneeling with surprising agility for her age, she examined it closely, her gloved finger tracing the edge. This mark, she said, it's fresh, like the scratches. As if something heavy was dragged, or someone stumbled. She glanced at Craddock, her eyes sharp. Was the stage swept after the performance? Not yet, Craddock said. We told the crew to leave everything as it was. He crouched beside her, studying the mark. Could be from the cabinet itself. Moved for the show. Possibly, Miss Marple said, but her tone suggested doubt. She stood, her mind weaving the clues together, the scratches, the chloroform, the scuff mark. Each was a thread, pointing not to a magician's illusion, but to a calculated act. She thought of Lily Harper's nervous hands, George Baxter's evasive bluster, Tom Weaver's bruised wrist, and Victor Slade's convenient lie about his seat. Someone, she suspected, had known the cabinet's secrets or exploited them. Inspector, she said, her voice soft but firm, this was no trick. Mr. Vane did not vanish of his own accord. Someone ensured he did not reappear, and this cabinet holds the key to why. She paused, her eyes scanning the empty stage. But we must be careful. The person behind this is clever, and clever people make few mistakes. Craddock nodded, his respect for her growing. I'll have my men go over this again, and we'll check for that chloroform. If it's there, it's evidence of foul play. He hesitated, then added, You've a knack for this, Miss Marple. If you've any theories, I'd be glad to hear them. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. Theories, Inspector, are like half-finished knitting, best not shared until the pattern's clear. But I will say this. The cabinet was meant to be a mystery, but someone turned it into a trap. We need only find who and why. She adjusted her shawl, her mind already tracing the next thread, her steps light as she descended from the stage, leaving the cabinet to guard its secrets a little longer. Raymond, waiting in the wings, caught her eye as she approached. Well, Aunt Jane, did the cabinet spill its secrets? He asked, his tone half teasing, half admiring. Not all of them, dear, she replied, her voice thoughtful. But it's told me enough to know this mystery is darker than we thought. Like a tangled skein, it will take patience to unravel, but the threads are there, if we look closely. She glanced back at the cabinet, its oak surface gleaming under the lights, and felt the weight of the puzzle settling into place. Chapter 8. The Rival's Alibi. The drawing-room of Raymond West's cottage in St. Mary's Cove was a cosy haven, its windows framing the restless sea beyond. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the chintz armchairs and the small table where Miss Jane Marple had arranged a modest tea. A silver tray held a teapot, cups, and a plate of shortbread. The simplicity of the setting a deliberate choice for her next encounter. She had invited Victor Slade, the rival magician, to join her here, away from the theatre's charged atmosphere. In her experience, people revealed more in the quiet of a home, where the absence of an audience stripped away their practiced masks, much like the villagers of St. Mary Mead, who confessed their troubles over tea in her parlour. Slade arrived with his usual polish, his black coat immaculate, his thin smile as sharp as a blade. He moved with the grace of a performer, but Miss Marple noted the slight tension in his shoulders, a faint crack in his otherwise flawless composure. "Miss Marple," he said, settling into the offered chair. "This is a charming change from the cafe. I didn't expect such a domestic setting for our little inquisition." His tone was light, but his dark eyes held a glint of wariness, as if he sensed the trap beneath her hospitality. "Oh, hardly an inquisition, Mr. Slade," Miss Marple replied, her voice as gentle as a summer breeze. She poured tea with a steady hand, her pale blue eyes meeting his with disarming warmth. "Merely a chat to help clear up this puzzle about Mr. Vane. You're so knowledgeable about the world of magic, I thought you might offer some insight." Her knitting needles, resting on the table, remained untouched for now, but their presence seemed to soften the room's edges, lulling Slade into a false sense of ease. He accepted the tea, stirring it with a slow, deliberate motion. "Insight? I'm flattered," he said, his smile widening. "But I'm afraid I'm as baffled as anyone. Cornelius's vanishing act was masterful until it wasn't. If he's truly gone, it's a loss to the craft." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the faintest edge, a note of insincerity that reminded her of a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper who once praised a rival's wares while plotting to undercut them. She leaned forward slightly, her expression one of polite curiosity. "You were watching closely, I'm sure, from the front row. It must be fascinating to study a rival's work. Did you notice anything amiss that night? A hesitation, perhaps? Or someone out of place?" Her question was innocent, but her eyes were sharp, watching for the smallest tell. Slade's fingers paused on the teacup, and for a moment his smile faltered. "Front row, yes," he said, recovering quickly. "Best seat to catch every detail. The show was flawless. Lily locked the cabinet, the flash went off, and Cornelius was gone. Nothing unusual until he didn't reappear." He sipped his tea, his gaze steady, but Miss Marple's mind flashed to the ticket stub she had glimpsed at the cafe. Balcony, row C, not the front row, he claimed. "How curious," she said, her voice soft. "The front row must offer such a clear view. I suppose you saw Miss Harper's every move, and the crew in the wings." She reached for her knitting, the needles clicking into motion, their rhythm a subtle counterpoint to the tension in the room. Slade nodded, his smile intact but strained. "Clear as day," he said. "Lily was nervous, but she always is. The crew was where they should be. Tom Weaver skulking about as usual. Nothing out of the ordinary." His words were confident, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tightened on the cup, the slight shift in his posture, as if bracing for a challenge. She tilted her head, her needles moving steadily. "It's odd, isn't it, how memory plays tricks? I was speaking with a gentleman in the audience who mentioned seeing you in the balcony, not the front row. A small thing, but I thought it worth mentioning." Her tone was mild, but the words landed like a pebble in a still pond, sending ripples through Slade's composure. His smile froze, and for a fraction of a second his eyes betrayed a flicker of alarm. "The balcony?" he said, laughing softly. "Must be a mistake. I was front and centre, watching Cornelius work his magic." But as he spoke, he reached into his coat pocket, perhaps instinctively, and a small slip of paper, the ticket stub, fluttered to the floor. He bent to retrieve it with a swift, almost desperate motion, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes had already confirmed the seat number. "Oh, do be careful, Mr. Slade," she said, her voice warm. "Papers are so easily lost. I once dropped a letter in St. Mary Mead, and it caused quite a stir when it was found." Her anecdote, delivered with a smile, seemed to disarm him, but she saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hand lingered on the stub before tucking it away. Seeking to press her advantage, Miss Marple shifted the conversation. "You travel a great deal, I understand," she said. "London, perhaps, in recent weeks. It must be exciting, visiting such a bustling city." Her question was casual, but her mind was on a snippet of information from Swirl. Inspector Craddock, a chemist in London, had reported a purchase of chloroform, a detail yet to be fully explored. Slade's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. "London, yes, a few weeks ago. A magician's convention, networking, that sort of thing. Nothing out of the ordinary." He set his cup down, his movements precise. "Why do you ask?" "Oh, no reason," Miss Marple said, her needles clicking rhythmically. "Only that London is so full of possibilities. New props, chemicals for stage effects. I imagine a magician needs all sorts of supplies." She paused, her eyes meeting his with a deceptive innocence. "Though I suppose you'd know better than I what goes into a trick like the Cabinet of Eternity." Slade's smile returned, but it was thinner now, less assured. "Chemicals? Not my style," he said. "Cornelius was the one for elaborate setups. Me, I prefer simpler illusions, less to go wrong." He stood smoothing his coat. "I should be going, Miss Marple. I've a performance to prepare for in Brighton, but I wish you luck with your puzzle." "Thank you, Mr. Slade," she said, rising with him. "You've been most kind. Do take care on your travels." As he left, she noted the quickness of his steps, the way he glanced back at the cottage, as if ensuring he had left nothing else behind. Raymond, who had been reading in the next room, appeared as the door closed. "Well, Aunt Jane, did you catch him in a lie?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile as she gathered her knitting. "Not just one, dear," she said, her voice soft but thoughtful. "Mr. Slade is a man who plays his part well, but he's misstepped. The ticket stub, his trip to London, it's all part of the pattern. And I suspect that pattern leads somewhere rather darker than a magician's rivalry." She glanced out the window, where the sea churned under a gathering storm, her mind already tracing the next thread in the mystery of Cornelius Vane's disappearance. Chapter 9. The Manager's Books, the office of the Grand Pavilion Theatre, tucked behind the auditorium, was a cramped sanctuary of paperwork and faded ambition. Its walls, lined with yellowing posters of past performances, seemed to close in under the weight of years. And the single window, streaked with sea salt, admitted only a sliver of grey light from St. Mary's Cove. Miss Jane Marple sat at the cluttered desk, her small figure dwarfed by stacks of ledgers, receipts, and dog-eared contracts. Her nephew Raymond, ever eager to assist, had persuaded Mr. Percival to grant her access to the theatre's financial records, a task that George Baxter, the manager, had relinquished with visible reluctance. "You won't find anything but numbers, Baxter had grumbled, his cigar smoke curling like a warning. But Miss Marple, with her keen understanding of human nature, knew that numbers like gossip in St. Mary Mead could tell stories of their own. She adjusted her spectacles, her pale blue eyes scanning the ledgers with the same meticulous care she applied to her knitting. The room smelled of ink, dust, and the faint bitterness of Baxter's cigars, a scent that clung to the pages as she turned them. Raymond, perched on a stool nearby, watched with a mix of amusement and admiration. "You look like a detective in one of my novels, Aunt Jane," he said, his voice light. "What do you hope to find in all this?" "Evidence of a vanishing act." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her fingers pausing on a column of figures. "Not quite, dear," she said, her tone as gentle as a village vicar's wife. "But money, you see, has a way of revealing motives. In St. Mary Mead, we once had a churchwarden who kept 2 sets of books, one for the parish, one for himself. It was the numbers that gave him away." She returned to the ledger, her mind sifting through the rows of expenses and receipts, each entry a potential thread in the mystery of Cornelius Vane's disappearance. The ledgers, at first glance, appeared orderly, their neat handwriting detailing ticket sales, prop costs and salaries. But as Miss Marple traced the figures, her sharp eyes caught irregularities, small at first, then glaring. A series of payments to a supplier named J. Hartley and Company stood out, their amounts substantial yet vague, listed simply as miscellaneous equipment. The frequency of these payments, weekly and sometimes twice weekly, far exceeded the cost of props for even a lavish production like Cornelius's. She noted the dates, cross-referencing them with the theatre's performance schedule, and found that several payments coincided with nights when the house was full, yet the recorded profits seemed curiously low. "Raymond, dear," she said, her voice soft but purposeful, "would you fetch me that folder of invoices by the window? I believe it's marked Suppliers." Raymond, eager to play his part, retrieved the folder, its edges frayed from frequent handling. Miss Marple leafed through it, her fingers deft despite her age, and found no trace of J. Hartley and Company among the listed vendors. No address, no contract, no record beyond the ledger entries. "How very curious," she murmured, her needles resting in her knitting bag, seeming to call for her attention. She resisted, her focus on the puzzle before her. "Do you think Baxter's been cooking the books?" Raymond asked, leaning over her shoulder, his literary instincts piqued. "It's the sort of thing a shady manager might do. Skim a bit off the top." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes still on the ledger. "Possibly, dear, but it's not just skimming, I think. These payments are too regular, too large, to be mere pocket change. And the absence of invoices suggests discretion." She thought of a saint, Mary Mead grocer, who once funneled church donations into a private account, his deceit uncovered by a missing receipt. Here the pattern was similar, but the stakes were higher, tied to a man's disappearance rather than a village scandal. She turned to another ledger, this one detailing Cornelius Vane's earnings. His contract, tucked among the pages, guaranteed him a significant share of ticket sales, yet the recorded deposits to his account were far less than expected for a sold-out run. Miss Marple's mind flashed to Baxter's gold watch, his tailored suits, the sheen of prosperity that clashed with the theatre's peeling paint and frayed curtains. Mr. Vane was not receiving his due, she said almost to herself, and I suspect he knew it. Raymond's eyes widened. You think Baxter was stealing from him? That's motive, Aunt Jane. If Cornelius found out and threatened to expose him— Precisely, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. Money is a powerful motive, but so is ambition or fear, and there are other threads to consider. She closed the ledger, her mind turning to the chloroform in the cabinet, Tom Weaver's bruise, and Victor Slade's lie about his seat. Each was a piece of the pattern, and Baxter's financial discrepancies were but one more. Determined to test her suspicions, Miss Marple asked Raymond to summon Baxter to the office. The manager arrived, his face flushed and his cigar absent, perhaps sensing the gravity of her request. Miss Marple, he said, his tone forcedly jovial. Found anything interesting in those dusty books? Nothing but bills and headaches, I wager. Oh, they're quite revealing, Mr. Baxter, she said, her smile as gentle as ever. I was curious about these payments to J. Hartley and Company. Substantial sums, yet I can't seem to find their invoices. Perhaps you could enlighten me? Her question was polite, but her eyes were sharp, watching the colour drain from Baxter's face. He coughed, adjusting his tie. Hartley, just a supplier, props and such. Probably misfiled the paperwork. You know how it is, busy season. His laugh was hollow, and Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his forehead, the way his hands fidgeted at his sides, so like a St. Mary Mead tailor caught overcharging for a suit. I'm sure, she said, her tone unchanged, but Mr. Vane's earnings also caught my eye. His contract promises a generous share, yet the deposits seem modest. Did he ever question you about this? Baxter's eyes narrowed, and for a moment she thought he might bluster his way out. But he slumped into a chair, his bravado crumbling. All right, he said, his voice low. I borrowed a bit here and there. Just to keep things running, you understand. The theatre's been struggling, repairs, debts. Cornelius was getting his cut, but maybe not as quick as he liked. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, his gold watch glinting. He found out last week. Threatened to go to Percival. Maybe they— police. But I didn't hurt him, I swear. I'd never— Miss Marple's needles, now in her hands, clicked softly, their rhythm calming the tense air. Of course, Mr. Baxter, she said, her voice soothing. But you understand, this makes things look rather serious. If Mr. Vane was planning to expose you, it might give someone cause to act. She paused, her eyes meeting his, and saw the fear flicker across his face. I didn't touch him, Baxter insisted, his voice rising. I was in the office during the show, checking receipts. Ask anyone. But his desperation, Miss Marple thought, was that of a man caught in one crime, not necessarily the one she sought to solve. Thank you, Mr. Baxter, she said, rising. You've been most helpful. I'm sure Inspector Craddock will want to discuss this further. As Baxter left, his steps heavy, she turned to Raymond, who was practically vibrating with excitement. Aunt Jane, you've got him on the ropes, he said. Embezzlement. That's a motive if I ever heard one. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her voice thoughtful. But greed is a common thread, dear, and not always the darkest. Mr. Baxter's crime is clear, but the chloroform, the scratches on the cabinet, they suggest something more deliberate. We must keep looking, for the pattern is not yet complete. She tucked her knitting away, her mind already tracing the next thread, her eyes fixed on the unseen shape of the truth. Chapter 10. The Stagehand's Confession. The air in St. Mary's Cove carried a chill as dusk settled over the town. The sea beyond the Grand Pavilion Theatre, whispering its restless secrets. Miss Jane Marple, wrapped in her familiar tweed coat, stood just outside the theatre's stage door, where the narrow alley was cloaked in shadow. The faint glow of a street lamp illuminated the cobblestones, and the distant cry of a gull punctuated the quiet. She had chosen this spot to intercept Tom Weaver, the stagehand, knowing that young men often revealed more when caught off guard, away from the scrutiny of others. In St. Mary Mead, she had once coaxed a confession from a nervous lad in the churchyard, his guilt unravelling under her gentle persistence, and she hoped for a similar outcome now. Tom emerged from the stage door, his lanky frame hunched against the evening breeze, his cap pulled low. He froze when he saw her, his grey eyes widening with a mix of surprise and apprehension. "Miss Marple," he stammered, his hands shoving deep into his pockets. "What are you doing out here? It's getting dark." "Oh, I enjoy a breath of sea air, Mr. Weaver," she said, her voice as warm as a fireside chat. "And I thought you might spare a moment to talk. You've been so helpful already, and I'm sure you want to see Mr. Vane found as much as I do." She smiled, her pale blue eyes gentle but unyielding, and gestured toward a nearby bench, its wood weathered by years of salt and spray. Tom hesitated, his gaze darting to the alley's end, as if considering flight. But Miss Marple's presence, so unassuming yet so compelling, seemed to anchor him. He shuffled to the bench, sitting with a slouch that betrayed his unease. "I told you everything I know," he said, his voice low, almost sullen. "I was moving scenery that night, didn't see nothing." Miss Marple settled beside him, her knitting bag resting on her lap. She drew out her needles, their soft clicking a familiar rhythm that seemed to ease the tension in the air. "Of course, my dear," she said, her tone soothing. "But sometimes things come back to us later. Small details we didn't think important at the time. In my village there was a boy who saw something odd in a garden, but it wasn't until we spoke quietly that he remembered it clearly." Her story, half invented, was meant to disarm, and she saw Tom's shoulders relax slightly, though his fingers twisted the edge of his cap. "I ain't got nothing new," he muttered. But his eyes betrayed him, flickering with a fear that Miss Marple recognized from countless encounters in St. Mary Mead. She noticed again the bruise on his wrist, now fading but still visible, a mark that spoke of force or struggle. Her mind flashed to the scuff mark near the cabinet, the chloroform's faint scent, and she leaned forward, her expression one of kindly concern. "That bruise, Mr. Weaver," she said softly. "It looks painful. Did you have an accident, perhaps, during the performance? The stage can be such a busy place." Her question was gentle, but precise, probing for the truth without accusation. Tom's hand jerked to his sleeve, covering the mark, and his face paled. "It's nothing," he said quickly. "Banged it moving a prop, that's all. Happens all the time." But his voice cracked, and Miss Marple saw the lie as clearly as a dropped stitch in a perfect row. She nodded, her needles clicking steadily. "I'm sure it does," she said. "But you were near the cabinet that night, weren't you? Before Mr. Vane's final trick. And I've heard you were seen speaking with Mr. Slade, perhaps more than once." She paused, her eyes meeting his, her gaze steady but kind. "Young men sometimes get caught up in things they don't intend, Tom. It's easy to be swayed by a promise or a threat." Tom's breath hitched, and for a moment she thought he might bolt. But he slumped further, his cap falling to his lap, his hands trembling. I didn't mean no harm," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sea's murmur. "It was just money. I needed it. My ma's sick, and the bills—" He trailed off, his eyes glistening, and Miss Marple's heart softened, though her mind remained sharp. "Go on, my dear," she said, her voice as gentle as a mother's. "Tell me what happened. It's better to share the truth, you know. It lifts such a weight." Tom swallowed, his gaze fixed on the cobblestones. "Slade came to me a week ago," he said, his words tumbling out now, as if a dam had broken. "Said he needed to know about the cabinet, how it worked, the blueprint. Offered me £50 more than I make in months. I took it. Gave him a sketch I found in the prop room. Didn't think it'd hurt anyone." His voice broke, and he rubbed his eyes with the back of his hand. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on the admission. "The blueprint?" she said softly. "So Mr. Slade knew the cabinet's mechanism. And did he ask you to do anything else?" Tom nodded, his face crumpling. "The night of the show, he told me to keep watch, make sure no one was near the cabinet before the trick. Said he just wanted to see it up close, figure out the rest. But I saw him, Miss Marple. Saw him in the wings, not the audience like he said. He had a vial, small, like something from a chemist. I tried to ask him what it was, but he grabbed my wrist, told me to keep my mouth shut." He touched the bruise, his fingers lingering, and Miss Marple saw the fear in his eyes, the guilt of a boy who had stumbled into something far larger than himself. Her mind raced, connecting the threads Slade's lie about his seat, the chloroform in the cabinet, the scratches on the lock. Tom's confession was a crucial stitch, binding Slade to the crime more firmly than before. She thought of a saint, Mary Mead lad who once helped a poacher, only to regret it when the truth came out. And she knew Tom's fear was genuine, his role that of a pawn in a larger game. "You've done the right thing telling me," she said, her voice warm but firm. "But we must tell Inspector Craddock too. He'll need to know about Mr. Slade and that vial. It could be very important, Tom." She placed a hand on his arm, her touch light but reassuring, and saw the relief in his eyes, mingled with dread. "I didn't know he'd hurt Cornelius," Tom said, his voice shaking. "I thought it was just about the tricks. You think he's all right, don't you? Cornelius?" "I hope so, my dear," Miss Marple said, her tone steady. "And with your help, we'll find him. Now come along. Let's find the inspector." She rose, her small figure resolute, and Tom followed, his steps hesitant but obedient, like a child caught and now seeking redemption. As they walked toward the theatre, Miss Marple's mind wove the new threads into the pattern. Slade's ambition, Tom's desperation, the chloroform, they pointed to a deliberate act, not a magician's stunt. She thought of the cabinet, its scratches and secrets, and knew the truth was close, waiting to be unravelled with the same patience she applied to her knitting. Raymond, waiting by the theatre entrance, caught sight of them and hurried over. "Aunt Jane, you've got that look," he said, his eyes bright with anticipation. "What's Tom told you?" Miss Marple's smile was faint but knowing. "Enough to tighten the pattern, dear," she said, her voice soft. "Mr. Slade is no longer just a rival, I think, but we must tread carefully. The final stitches are yet to come." She glanced at Tom, his face pale but resolute, and led him inside, her mind already tracing the path to the next revelation. Chapter 11. The Magician's Hideaway. The evening sky over St. Mary's Cove was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain, as Miss Jane Marple sat in the back of Inspector Craddock's police car. her knitting bag nestled beside her. The vehicle bumped along a narrow road leading out of town, toward a derelict warehouse on the cliffs overlooking the sea. Tom Weaver's confession had provided the crucial thread, pointing to Victor Slade's involvement in Cornelius Vane's disappearance, and a tip from a local fisherman had led Craddock to this isolated spot. Miss Marple's small figure, wrapped in her tweed coat, seemed out of place among the grim-faced constables, but her pale blue eyes were alight with quiet determination, her mind weaving the final threads of the mystery into a coherent pattern. In St. Mary Mead, she had once followed a similar trail, a whispered rumour leading to a shed where stolen goods were hidden, and she sensed that here, too, the truth awaited. The warehouse loomed ahead, its rusted corrugated walls sagging under years of neglect. The sea's roar was louder here, the wind carrying a salty bite that stung Miss Marple's cheeks as she stepped from the car. Craddock, his expression taut, gestured for his men to surround the building, their boots crunching on the gravel. "Stay back, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low but firm. "If Slade's in there, he could be dangerous." "Of course, Inspector," she replied, her tone as mild as ever, though she had no intention of missing the denouement. She positioned herself near a crumbling wall, her sharp eyes scanning the warehouse's broken windows, where faint light flickered within. Her thoughts turned to the clues that had led them here. The chloroform in the cabinet, the scratches on the lock, Tom's confession of Slade's vial, and the ticket stub placing Slade in the balcony, not the audience. Each was a stitch, and now the pattern was nearly complete. Craddock signalled, and 2 constables forced the warehouse door, its hinges screaming in protest. The interior was a cavern of shadows, lit only by a single lantern, casting eerie shapes across crates and tangled ropes. Miss Marple followed at a discreet distance, her steps silent, her senses attuned to every detail. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and something sharper, chloroform, faint but unmistakable, confirming her suspicions. Near the back, a muffled sound, a groan, broke the silence, and Craddock's men moved swiftly, their torches cutting through the gloom. In a corner, bound to a chair with coarse rope, sat Cornelius Vane. His silver cape was gone, his face haggard, his eyes half closed from the effects of chloroform. But he was alive, his chest rising and falling, a faint spark of defiance in his gaze as he registered the police. Miss Marple's heart quickened, relief mingling with resolve. Beside Cornelius stood Victor Slade, his polished demeanour replaced by a tense, cornered look. In his hand was a small vial, its contents glinting in the lantern's light, and a notebook lay open on a crate, filled with sketches of the Cabinet of Eternity. "Slade!" Craddock barked, his revolver drawn. "Step away! Hands up! It's over!" Slade's eyes darted to the door, then to Cornelius, his smile thin and brittle. "Over? Hardly, Inspector. I was merely borrowing Cornelius's genius. His tricks are worth a fortune, and he wasn't using them to their potential." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple saw the desperation beneath it, the same desperation she had seen in a St. Mary Mead poacher, caught with a stolen pheasant. She stepped forward, her small figure illuminated by a constable's torch. "Mr. Slade," she said, her voice gentle but piercing, "you underestimated more than Mr. Vane's talent. You underestimated an old lady's curiosity." Her eyes met his, unyielding despite her mild demeanour. The ticket stub, the chloroform, young Tom's confession, They all pointed to you. You wanted Mr. Vane's act, but kidnapping is a dangerous trick." Slade's smile faded, his hand tightening on the vial. "You're clever, Miss Marple," he said, his voice low. "But you've no proof. A ticket stub? A boy's word? I was studying Cornelius, nothing more." He gestured to the notebook. "These are just notes, ideas for my own show." Miss Marple's lips curved faintly. "Notes, perhaps, but the chloroform in that vial and the scratches on the cabinet's lock tell a different story. You used Tom to learn the cabinet's secrets, then drugged Mr. Vane to keep him silent while you pried open his act. But secrets, Mr. Slade, have a way of unravelling, like a poorly knit scarf." Her tone was calm, but her words carried the weight of certainty, and she saw the flickers of defeat in his eyes. Craddock's men moved in, and Slade, seeing no escape, dropped the vial, its contents spilling onto the floor. He raised his hands, his charm crumbling as handcuffs clicked into place. Cornelius, freed by a constable, struggled to his feet, his voice hoarse but resolute. "You thought you could steal my work," he said, glaring at Slade. "But I'd die before giving you my tricks." Miss Marple's heart softened at his pride, so like the stubborn dignity of a St. Mary Mead craftsman defending his trade. "You're safe now, Mr. Vane," she said, her voice warm, "and your secrets are your own." As the police led Slade away, Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of awe and gratitude. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said. "How did you know to look here?" She smiled, adjusting her shawl. "It was the threads, Inspector. Tom's fear, Slade's lies, the chloroform. They all pointed to a place where a man could be hidden, yet close enough to watch the theatre's fallout. In St. Mary Mead, we once found a stolen painting in a barn, because the thief couldn't resist staying near his prize. Mr. Slade was much the same." She glanced at Cornelius, now being tended by a constable, and felt the satisfaction of a pattern completed. Raymond, who had insisted on joining the expedition, emerged from the shadows, his eyes wide. "Aunt Jane, you're a marvel," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "You turned a vanishing act into a rescue mission." "Not quite, dear," she said, her voice soft but firm. "I merely followed the threads. Now, let's get Mr. Vane to safety and perhaps a cup of tea." She turned toward the warehouse door, her mind already settling. The mystery resolved, but the final act yet to play out, on the stage of the Grand Pavilion. Chapter 12. The Final Bow. The Grand Pavilion Theatre, bathed in the golden glow of its newly polished chandeliers, hummed with anticipation on a crisp evening in St. Mary's Cove. The auditorium, packed to the rafters, buzzed with whispers of Cornelius Vane's miraculous return, the tale of his kidnapping and rescue already woven into local legend. The crimson curtains, freshly cleaned, hung with a renewed grandeur, and the air carried the familiar sense of polished wood and anticipation, untainted now by the shadow of mystery. Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in the back row, her small figure unobtrusive in her familiar tweed coat, her knitting bag tucked beside her. She had declined Mr. Percival's offer of a front-row seat, preferring the vantage point of the shadows, where she could observe both stage and audience with her usual clarity. Raymond West, seated beside her, leaned close, his eyes bright with excitement. "You've outdone yourself this time, Aunt Jane," he whispered, his literary mind already spinning the tale into a novel. "Cornelius back on stage, Slade in custody, Baxter facing charges. It's a triumph worthy of Poirot himself." Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile, her pale blue eyes fixed on the stage. "Not quite, dear," she said, her voice soft but firm. Monsieur Poirot has his methods, but I prefer the simplicity of human nature. People you see are like stitches in a pattern. One loose thread, and the whole design unravels. Her fingers rested on her knitting bag, though she had no need to knit tonight. The pattern was complete, the mystery resolved. The house lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A single spotlight pierced the darkness, and Cornelius Vane stepped onto the stage, his silver cape catching the light like a cascade of stars. The audience erupted in applause, their cheers a mix of relief and admiration. Cornelius, though still pale from his ordeal, carried himself with the same commanding presence Miss Marple had noted on that fateful night. His dark eyes gleamed with determination, and his voice, when he spoke, resonated with a quiet strength. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tonight I return not as a magician who vanished, but as a man who was found, thanks to the vigilance of those who saw through the shadows." The crowd roared, and Miss Marple's keen eyes scanned the faces around her. She noted Lily Harper in the wings, her auburn hair gleaming, her expression one of quiet pride. Lily's loyalty had been tested, but her affection for Cornelius, so clear to Miss Marple's perceptive gaze, shone through now, unclouded by fear. In the front row, Mr. Percival beamed, his round face flushed with the success of the theatre's revival. Absent were George Baxter, whose embezzlement had led to his arrest, and Tom Weaver, who faced charges for conspiracy, but had been granted leniency for his cooperation. Victor Slade, the orchestrator of the crime, was in custody, his ambition undone by the very secrets he sought to steal. Cornelius's performance was a marvel, each trick more dazzling than the last. Doves soared from empty scarves, flames danced in his hands, and the cabinet of eternity, now repaired and free of its sinister taint, stood as the centerpiece of the finale. When Cornelius stepped inside and vanished, only to reappear in a burst of light at the back of the stage, the audience leapt to their feet, their applause thunderous. Miss Marple clapped politely, her mind not on the spectacle, but on the human drama that had unfolded behind it, the greed, the envy, the desperation that had woven the mystery's threads. As the curtain fell, Raymond turned to her, his grin wide. "You could take a bow yourself, Aunt Jane," he said. "You solved it all, Slade's plot, Baxter's theft, even Tom's part. How do you do it?" Miss Marple's smile was gentle, her eyes distant as she gathered her bag. "It's no great secret, dear," she said. "People are much the same, whether in St. Mary Mead or a grand theatre. They hide their fears, their desires, but they leave clues, small things like a ticket stub or a nervous glance. You need only watch and listen, and the truth comes clear." She rose, her steps light, and made her way to the foyer, where the crowd spilled out into the night, their voices alive with excitement. Inspector Craddock met her there, his broad frame filling the doorway. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice warm with gratitude, "you've saved the day again. Vane's back, Slade's locked up, and we've got Baxter's books to sort out the rest. I don't know how you do it." "Oh, Inspector," she said, her tone modest, "I only followed the threads. You and your men did the real work, bringing Mr. Vane home." She glanced toward the stage door, where Cornelius was signing programs, Lily at his side. "And Mr. Vane, I think, will take better care of his secrets now." Craddock chuckled, tipping his hat. "I'll wager he will. Safe travels back to St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple, though I suspect we'll see you again, if trouble stirs." "Not too soon, I hope," she said, her eyes twinkling. As Raymond escorted her to his car, the sea sparkled under the rising moon, its rhythm a quiet echo of her thoughts. The drive back to the cottage was peaceful, the mystery resolved, the pattern complete. Yet Miss Marple knew that human nature, like the sea, was ever-changing, and new threads would always await her patient unravelling.